Before the Texas Revolution, before we even get to the Alamo, there was another battle raging. And this one wasn't fought with cannons or rifles. Nope. It was a battle of ideas, of words, of ambition. It was really a fight between neighbors. Those who were absolutely convinced that peace with Mexico was the only way, and those who believed war was their only chance for survival. So to really get to the bottom of this, we're diving straight into the source material, a really detailed historical thesis by Jodella Dorothea Kite. Her work is basically our roadmap here, showing us exactly how a series of provocations, some clashing personalities, and one really critical choice pushed Texas right over the edge. All right, we're going to walk through this whole story in 5 main parts. We'll start with the single law that really created the first big divide. Then, we'll see how that law led to actual fighting. We'll get to know the 2 groups that popped up, the Warhawks and the Doves. Then, we'll track the events that just completely erased any middle ground. And finally, we'll zero in on the one man whose decision pretty much sealed the deal for Texas. Okay, so where does this all kick off? Well, it doesn't start with a bang. It starts with a piece of paper. A law that fundamentally changed the entire relationship between the Anglo-colonists and the Mexican government. It all really gets going back in 1828. A Mexican general, Mier y Terán, he's touring Texas and he sends a report back to Mexico City that's, well, pretty worried. He's alarmed. He's seeing these Anglo settlers outnumbering Mexicans by a huge margin, bringing their own political ideas and just acting, well, a little too independent for his comfort. And that report? It lands right on the desk of a new, much more controlling centralist government, which leads directly to the law of April 6, 1830. And just look at what this law did. It was like a direct assault on the very reasons these folks had come to Texas in the first place. First, it slams the door shut on their friends and family coming from the U.S. Then it threatens the system of slavery that many of their farms and businesses depended on. Then it freezes the land grants, the very foundation of their wealth. And to top it all off, it announces that more soldiers are on their way to make sure everyone follows these new rules. Historian Eugene C. Barker just nails it here. This wasn't just another regulation. It was a massive shock to the system. For the very first time, the colonists' belief in the Mexican government's goodwill was seriously shaken. This law basically laid the foundation for all the conflict that was about to come. And yeah, it did not take long for that conflict to show up. I mean, the ink on that new law was barely dry before all that tension just boiled over into actual violence, drawing the first really clear lines in the sand between the colonists themselves. So this all comes to a head in 1832 at a coastal fort called Anahuac. The Mexican commander there, a guy named John Bradburn, he decides to get tough and arrests 2 colonists, William B. Travis and Patrick Jack, for causing trouble. Big mistake. In response, 160 armed and angry settlers march right on the fort. An attempt to grab a cannon leads to a real bloody fight at a nearby town called Velasco. Now, cooler heads did eventually win out, Bradburn was removed, but a message had definitely been sent. And this is the big takeaway here. While a lot of the established colonists were quick to condemn these actions as reckless, others were celebrating them as heroic. The events of 1832 forced everybody to kind of pick a side. Are you for talking it out and working through the system, or are you for grabbing a gun when you feel your rights are being trampled? And just like that, the war and peace parties were born. Okay, so this brings us to the real heart of the matter. Who were these 2 groups? What made them tick? I mean, they weren't official political parties with membership cards or anything, but they represented 2 totally different visions for the future of Texas. So at their core, their ideas were pretty straightforward. You had the War Party, let's call them the Hawks, who saw every new regulation, every new soldier as an act of tyranny that had to be met with force, right now. Then you had the Peace Party, the Doves, led by guys like Stephen F. Austin. They were all about patience. They argued, hey, we're Mexican citizens. We can and we should fix these problems through legal and political means. And let me tell you, this wasn't some friendly disagreement. These guys did not like each other. They saw each other as real threats. Right here, we see Stephen F. Austin himself, the father of Texas, describing the leaders of the War Party. He didn't see patriots. He saw dangerous hotheads, demagogues, and political fanatics who he thought were going to destroy everything he'd spent years building. This table just lays it all out so clearly. I mean, look at this. The War Party guys, they're younger, newer to Texas, mostly lawyers and merchants from the American Deep South. You could say they were more restless, less invested in how things were, and maybe had more to gain from a fight. Now look at the Peace Party. Older, been in Texas longer, more established. These were the original farmers, the land developers. They had built their entire lives and fortunes here under the Mexican system, and they had way, way more to lose if things got chaotic. So for a couple of years, you have these two groups in a really tense balance. Most colonists were siding with the Peace Party, right? They preferred quiet over conflict. But then a whole series of events starts to happen that just systematically rips apart any chance for a peaceful solution. The middle ground is about to completely vanish. And it all happened so fast. First, the one guy the Texans hoped would be a reformer, General Santa Anna, he basically declares himself a dictator and tears up the Constitution that they had all sworn to follow. Then, the absolute voice of moderation, Stephen F. Austin, gets arrested and thrown in prison in Mexico City. And finally, Santa Anna's own brother-in-law sends a demand that the colonists arrest their own neighbors, the war party leaders, and hand them over for a military trial. Each step was just another push towards the edge. Just let that sink in for a second. 18 months. Their most respected leader, the guy who was constantly preaching patience and loyalty to Mexico, was tossed in a jail cell without a trial. For so many colonists, this was just the ultimate betrayal. I mean, if this could happen to Austin, what chance did any of the rest of them have? This quote from a letter written in August 1835 just captures the mood perfectly. You can feel the tension. Even as people are saying they want peace, you can hear their patience just running out. They had a breaking point. They still preferred peace, but man, they were getting ready to kick like mules. So the whole situation was just impossible. The Peace Party's arguments for being patient and calm were starting to sound pretty hollow. Their government was turning into a dictatorship, their most famous leader was locked up, and now that same government wanted them to turn in their own neighbors. What on earth were they supposed to do next? Well, the answer, and the final turning point in all this, it came with the return of the one guy who still had the respect of pretty much every single colonist, the one man who could actually unite these two warring factions, Stephen F. Austin. So on September 8, 1835, Austin finally sets foot back on Texas soil. He had left as a diplomat, arguing for peace, for cooperation. He came back a completely different man, changed by everything he'd seen and gone through in those prisons down in Mexico City. I mean, just look at this contrast. It's night and day. Before he was arrested, Austin was dismissing the divisions as an evil that will correct itself. He believed in the system. But after prison, he was totally convinced that the government was despotic. He wasn't calling for patience anymore. Instead, he came out and supported the war party's biggest demand, a consultation, a big meeting for all of Texas to get together and decide its own future. And this is the moment everything just clicks into place. Gail Borden, who was an early Texas publisher, he summed up what everyone was feeling. They had been waiting for Austin. His word was basically law. Whatever he decided, that's what they were going to do. And with Austin's support, the Peace Party just dissolved. The cautious majority threw all their support behind organized resistance. The internal debate was finally over. The factions were united, and Texas was now on a one-way track straight towards revolution. Which really leaves us with a fascinating question to chew on, right? Was this revolution always going to happen? Was it just an inevitable clash of two different cultures? Or was it pushed into happening by those demagogues Austin once warned about? The very same firebrands who, in the end, turned out to be right.